Hi everybody, Steve Farmer here, bringing you continuing coverage from the US Chess League for the Arizona Scorpions. I apologize for being a bit derelict in my duties. I did not present the games from the Manhattan contest last week. That's because my father passed away. He was 91 years old. He was suffering from dementia for the last month and a half or so of his life, and he was a very intelligent person. He was part of Project Echelon. The guy was a smart man. You'd be amazed at what those guys did to communicate across the world before satellites were up in the sky. But that kept me from bringing you the games from last week. So I'm just going to recap real quick what happened in the Manhattan episode from last week. Arizona lost that, unfortunately. It came down to board 4, where Dipro Chakraborty was playing for the Arizona Scorpions. And Dipro had a rough opening, but he got a decent middle game, and then he actually had a winning late middle game to end game transition. He missed a win there, a clear win, but he maintained a good edge in the position. And then, for some strange reason, he had to make a pretty obvious move, and he had 1 minute and 27 seconds on his clock, from what I could tell, when it was his turn to move, and it was a rather obvious move that he had to play, but for some reason he lost on time. Now, he had a chance to win that, and if he would have won it, that would have tied the match with Manhattan. So some little fluke happened there. I don't know exactly what happened, but, who are you going to call? So Arizona lost their match against Manhattan, but this week they're up against the San Francisco Mechanics. So there's no chance for them to sit back and rest. They got to fight. Every time they have a match, it's going to be a fight. So here we're going to go with game fragments of all 4 games. And I'm going to start from board 1 to board 4, because in this instance, it really didn't make any difference. So on our first game fragment here, we have Mackenzie Molnar playing white. He's rated 24.99, and he's going up against Jesse Cry at 25.67. Now, Jesse's a very strong player. He's easily getting up to the 2600 range. He's a really good guy. So is Mac. So these are 2 really good, decent people going at it. And as you can tell from this position, we have had a wild opening. But I don't have the time to go through all the nuances of the opening. So we're just going to get here where the critical positions start to appear on the board. And in this case, it's white to move, Mac, and he plays c4. Now, the idea is clear. He's going to be pestering this pawn on c6. Jesse took on b2, and now Mac plays queen takes b2, which I think is the correct move, because there's a little bit of a surprise here if he plays bishop takes b2. And it's not really evident until you start digging into this position and trying to figure out what the players are wanting to accomplish here. So here, knight to f4 is forking the queen into bishop, which is a logical move. And then queen to e4. And now queen takes b2 should be played. If knight takes g2, then knight takes c6, bishop c5. The bishop had to move, it was hit. Now we can play knight takes d8. We're winning the exchange out of this for a pawn because the knight on g2 is still hanging. So not a good line for black, really. But here he can play queen takes b2, which is different. And now if queen takes f4, there's a neat little move here. Knight takes e5. Surprise! This may be what Mac saw before taking with the bishop on b2. And the point here is, if queen takes e5, then bishop f6, obviously we're skewering onto that knight on d4. So white has to try something like rook a b1. Now he can play queen takes d4, rook takes, bishop takes e5, trade the rooks, bishop takes pawn, and now rook to c8. And I think that black is doing a bit better here. He's a pawn up. It's bishops opposite colors, so that's going to make it a bit drawish. But this is a pawn up for black. You don't want to go that way. And going back here after the knight takes on e5 with the surprise, if white tries knight takes c6, then comes rook takes rook check, rook takes, knight takes, bishop takes, rook c8, and this is pretty much similar to what we just looked at. Again, white is down a pawn. So perhaps Mac had seen that tricky little move, knight takes e5. I'm sure that Jesse had that up his sleeve. But Mac played queen takes b2. It's rather dry and boorish, but you got to do what you got to do. Now the knight on d5 is hit. It's got to move. And now Mac opts to keep the pieces on the board as much as he can with bishop to d2 here. But let's take a step back. That pawn on c6 is hanging, isn't it? So what happens if he takes on c6? And I think taking with the knight is the proper way to go here. Hitting the rook and the bishop on e7, so he has to take it. Now, rook takes to d7 was the move I thought was the most interesting. And now if queen takes b2, I think is the best move. We do a check, takes, and then bishop takes b2. And this looks pretty much level to me. The material is equal. Maybe white has a tiny bit of pull owing to the bishop pair, but I think Jesse would be able to manage this endgame just fine. So for that reason, I think Mac played bishop to d2, which might be actually an inferior move, but it keeps the position complicated. And now Jesse plays knight takes e5, and now we see the trick that Mac had up his sleeve. Knight takes e6. So we've gone through a complex opening, and now we have a very complex middle game. Jesse and Mac have both been known to use their time up quite rapidly. I may not have mentioned this, but I was not watching the games live because my dad had passed away on the day these games were played. So I can only assume that the players were entering into time pressure at this point. And I think that's why Mac wanted to complicate things, because he's a very tactically gifted player. And I think that's why he wanted to go down this road. Well, the threat here is obvious. The knight on e5 is hanging after this little deal. So after pawn takes on e6, Mac scoops up the knight on e5. And now a nice little trick here. Queen takes f2. Check. This seems to be the best shot. Of course, it's just a rudimentary tactics. Sometimes these little tricks can save the game. Let's go back. Bishop f6 was a possibility. I don't think it's as strong as queen takes f2. Because queen can take here, check, king moves over, rook a to b1, a5, bishop e3, and queen to c7. I think white's a tiny bit better here, but black does have that advanced a-pawn, which could be a problem for white later on. But then again, white has the bishop pair, so it's very up in the air. Going back, though, with Jesse's move, queen takes f2, well, you pretty much have to take, and then knight to d3, forks the king and queen. So the king goes to e2, knight takes on e5, and then bishop c3. And what has Mac gained out of this? Well, he is once again in an endgame where he's down in material. I got to explain the concept of endgames to Mac. You don't want to be down material. Last week he did this, and I think the week before he also ended up being down in material. No, I think that was equal material in that endgame. But Mac, you're getting into endgames more and more and more, so you might want to take this advice. When you go into an endgame, be up in material. Now, to be honest, I think black is a little better because he has a material, but white has a certain amount of compensation with the bishop pair and the open nature of the position. So, yeah, it's a game, but I'd rather have the material. All right, rook takes d1 is played. And rook takes d1, and knight takes on c4. And the pawn on c6 is a goner. Now rook to d8, offering wholesale exchanges. But Mac wants to keep pieces on. He wants to keep it complicated. Goes bishop to d7, hitting the pawn on e6. And if he moves the pawn, then bishop to e6 is going to fork the king and knight. So king to f7, rook checks on f1, bishop f6, and now bishop to a4. Now, I think that Mac played this way on purpose because the most obvious looking move here is going to be bishop to b5. And after knight to d6, bishop to d3. And I think the position of the bishops is optimal here. Now, the thing is, though, let's go back, is if they're both in time pressure, what you want to do is find the best path that you can take that is not expected by your opponent. So he has to spend a little bit of time thinking about what he wants to do. So I think bishop a4 kind of fits into that idea. Now, Jesse plays king to g6, and now bishop to c2. That's check. King to g5, bishop to e1, rook to b8, And king to f3. And now bishop to b2. h4. Let's check. And I think this position here is just completely level. You know, black is up 2 pawns, but he's not going to have the opportunity to do anything with him. White's just going to keep harassing the black king here. King h6 and king to g3. Bishop checks on e5. King to h3. Rook to b2. Jesse's trying to get as active as he can. g5 with check. There's only one move. And now rook to f2. Just going back quickly, I just want to point out bishop d1 just lets the king come sliding out of his awkward position there. So that's why Mac played rook to f2 here, to try and keep the king bottled up in some way. Knight to e3, and now bishop takes h7. The strength of the bishop pair finally makes itself felt, and white is able to pick off a pawn. Now he's only 1 pawn down, and he still maintains the bishop pair. Things are dead level at this position, with the exception of what's going on the clock. Rook takes f2 is played. Now bishop takes f2, bishop to d4, bishop to g8, and now a horrible mistake by Jesse. He plays king to g6. He should play, let's go back, he should play knight to f5, so that after bishop to e1, he can play knight to d6. Yeah, he's going to lose the e-pawn, so we're dead even on pawns now. But now he gets his forces centrally massed, and he's able to hold the game pretty easily. Bishop checks and then g6. No progress for white, and I don't think that black can make any progress either. He can't really control the light squares, because his knight would have to be on a dark square to control the light square, and white would always be able to trade that dark squared bishop off for the knight, and the bishop on f7 covers the light squares just fine. A dead equal game. But going back here, after king to g6, this is a good place to pause the video and see if you can find the winning maneuver. White to play and win. Take your time on this. It's a bit of a puzzler, and it's worth knowing it. Okay, hopefully you paused the video, and you've seen a grandmaster move that the grandmaster didn't see. Mac played bishop e6. That's not the right move. But check this out. What about bishop takes e3? Okay. Well, this just flat out wins. Bishop takes e3, and what next? White to move. Alright, if you found king to g4, you're a genius. That's a real grandmaster move. Black is all tied up, and there is a mate threat on the board right now. White just simply threatens to push the h-pawn to h5 and deliver checkmate. So, black's hand is forced. He's got to take the pawn. Amazing, huh? And now after pawn takes, well, I'll just go through some moves here so you can see that it's not that difficult to hold this with white. Now, white's got to maintain that last pawn, but fortunately his bishop's powerful enough to do that. Okay, now the bishop's blocking either pawn from advancing. Grabs one, and he's able to stop the other, and he can come back and grab one like this. Or, whoops, or instead of g6, if he goes back here, well, just start infiltrating with the king. And black has run out of moves. He's going to lose the pawn and the game. But back in our game, bishop takes e6 was played, and after a5, the players agreed to a draw at this point. Now, I'm kind of curious to know if the players did a little post-mortem on this to see that bishop takes e3 back here was winning or not. Amazing that it was in the position at all. That's why you always have to be alert. Yeah, bishop takes e3, you take back, and then king to g4. Just absolutely crushes. And that would have been a really cool way to round off this match. And you'll see why I'm saying that when we look at the remaining games. Alright, let's get on to our next game. Okay, for our second game, we're going to be looking at the game of Dmitry Zilberstein, who is playing white at the top here. He's rated 2493. He's playing for the San Francisco Mechanics. And we have Lev Altunian playing black at the bottom. He's rated 2472. Should prove to be an interesting fight. And this time I will present the opening as well, but we're going to go through it rather quickly because it's a pretty simple opening to understand. There's a little nuance here that I want to point out. F5, the Dutch. I think Lev has been a bad influence on Robbie Adamson. Just kidding. The Dutch has a great deal of positional logic to it, and I can see why Lev likes to play it. Alright, G3, castles, bishop G2, D6, knight F3, queen to E7, castles, C6, rook FE1, D5. Stonewall style. And now queen to D3. Now this is not a typical move in the Dutch, and I'll explain why. Usually the queen remains on the C1 H6 diagonal, and the reason for that will become apparent. But let's get on with the game, otherwise you won't know why there's a little trick here. Now knight to E4, very typical. Knight E5, still typical. Knight D7, the trade, very typical. And now F3, very typical of the Dutch. But here there's a difference. If the queen is on D2, obviously you're going to have to trade the knights for it. But in this situation here, the knight's hit, so it's got to move, so might as well take on C3, so that after queen takes on C3, you have F4 here. Now, going back, the idea here for white, if it's white to move, he'd like to just throw in E4. But here with this pawn on F4, if he goes E4, we can take en passant, and it just ruins white's plan. So, because the queen is not on D2 in these lines, this move is possible. Alright, so E3, FG3, HG3, bishop E8. A typical Dutch idea to reposition the bishop on H5 or G6 or F7. E4 is finally thrown in. Now pawn takes on C4. And this may seem a bit anti-positional because it's leaving an isolated pawn on E6, but no worries if it can't be hit. Queen takes C4, now rook to D8. Getting active. Rook AD1, bishop H5, rook to D3, C5, F4, G5. Very sharp play by Lev. To be honest, he probably didn't like the looks of things on board 1 at this point and wanted to play ultra sharp and aggressive so that he had good winning chances if needed. One thing I would like to point out, when you work with computers in modern times, they're so strong, you start finding that they have actually quite a bit of disregard for pawn structure and pawn placement. Whereas in a classically trained mind, we're taught that the pawns are the soul of chess, they can't move backwards, so be very careful when you move them. Well, you do have to still be careful when you move them, but you can consider moves like C5 and D takes C4 and G5 here. They would have seemed absolutely bizarre 20, 25 years ago. But here, in today's day and age, they're acceptable and they're actually becoming the norm now. Alright, so Dmitry takes on G5, and now Lev takes on C4. Rook takes D4. Now I think B5 could be thrown in here, just for another oddball pawn move. But I'm not sure how well it fits into the plans that Lev has. So Lev just trades on D4. Queen takes D4, queen takes G5. Material's equal, and both players have shoddy pawn structures. Queen to D6. Now E5. Gets the pawn off the color complex of his bishop and blocks in white's bishop on G2. So this in itself gives black a tiny, tiny bit of an edge. Queen to D3 was played, now rook to D8, chasing the queen back, queen to C3, and now sound positional judgment by Lev, queen to D2. The trade of queens is not good for white here. Is it winning for black? You know, that's debatable. I think it's just leading to a very good game for black. Alright, queen to C1 is probably the best move here, but Dmitry didn't play that. He played rook to C1, protecting the queen, but Lev wasted no time in trading. And now rook to D1 check, king to H2, and rook to D2. Alright, the pawn on B2 is hit. And if he moves that, the pawn on A2 falls. But there's yet another woe in the white camp. He can't move that rook on c3 off the third rank. Otherwise, bishop to f3 is going to pick off a piece. So, he played rook to b3 in the game. Let's take a quick step back. What if he played b4? With the idea that if rook takes a2, he can go king to h3. Now bishop to g6. And the idea here is he thinks he can win a pawn back with rook to c8, king to f7, rook to c7, king to f6. And here's the point. Why can he not take on b7? It's a little test for you. Pause the video and see if you can find a folly behind rook takes b7. Okay. Well, if rook takes b7, what do you play? Rook takes g2. And the point of this is after king takes g2, you got bishop takes e4 check, and you pick up the rook. You're up a piece. So after this move, king to f6, he's going to have to move the bishop away. And then after b6, the pawn on a7 is protected, and black is up a pawn. Black has a much better position and can play for a win, whereas white is really going to struggle to try and make this a draw. So, Dmitry maybe looked at that, didn't like it, and he played rook to b3. But he's met with another nice move by Lev, bishop to d1. But Lev spots a unique geometric anomaly in this position and it gives him excellent winning chances. Again, the rook cannot come off of the third rank because of bishop f3. So he played rook to a3, and now the rook can take on b2, and again the pawn on a7 cannot be taken because of bishop to f3. So the pawn on a7 even here cannot be taken. So that's what Lev spotted, and that's why he played bishop to d1. King to g1 was played, and now a6, preserving the pawn. Rook to a5, king to f7, rook takes e5. It's a trade of a central pawn for a wing pawn, but in this case it gives black two connected passed pawns. Now bishop to h3, bishop to b3, rook c5, rook to c2. Lev would like to trade rooks, but Dmitry denies him that chance. And now a few checks here. Rook to f5, rook to c6, king to f2, king to g6. I think b5 was a better idea, but king to g6, rook to e5, b5 now, king to e3, king f6, rook to h5. Now black plays king to g6, otherwise rook to h6 is going to pick up the a pawn. So rook to e5. It's a very difficult ending for black to make really positive steps forward. But I think here he should play rook to c7. He did not, but the idea of this is to get behind his own pawns to give them support to march up the board. I think he has some decent winning chances in that line, but he plays bishop f7 here. Now, white plays king to f4, but I don't think that's the best move. I think he should try rook to e7, and he should try and get behind the pawns himself. And now if b4, then we get bishop f5 check, king f6, rook to b7, a5, g4, a4, now g5 check. If he leaves the bishop alone on f7, it'll get swapped up. So king to g7, bishop to d7, rook c3 check, king f4, and now king f8. If he goes a3, then we got bishop e6, and this is not going to work out good. Rook c2, you can take here, king g6, rook f6, king g7, bishop to d5, rook f2 check, king e5, rook to d2, rook to a6, and white's winning this. The pawns are going nowhere. But back in this line, if he plays king to f8 instead, then bishop takes a4, b3, bishop d7, rook c2. I think we're going to end up with just a draw. So going back to the game, I think rook to e7 gave Dmitry some very good drawing chances. But he played king to f4, and now Lev should play king to f6. to just avoid that entire line that we just looked at. Instead, he played b4, and this gave Dmitry another chance to play rook to e7, and this time he didn't pass it up. And now rook to b6. I think Lev realized the mistake he made, and he's trying to bolster things up, but I'm not too sure that he can win this game any longer. e5. As a matter of fact, white's probably a bit better here. Even though black's up a pawn, white's got a lot of pressure and pieces hovering around the enemy king. Bishop g8 was played by Lev, and now the bishop checks on f5, king to h6, and I think here rook to d7 was the move. He played e6. But real quickly, let's look at rook to d7. Now rook to b8, g4, b3, g5 is check, king to h5, rook to d1 threatens mate, rook to b4 check, bishop to e4, rook takes e4 is the only way to try and stay alive, king takes, now king to g6, if you take on g5, he checks on g1, picks up the bishop on g8. Rook to a1, a5, rook takes, king goes up, rook goes back, bishop f7. This is just hopeless. Rook to g2, bishop e6, king d4, king h6, and king to c5. He's going to come around to d6 and then push the pawn up, forcing black to give up his bishop for the pawn. Yeah, he had some chances there, but Dmitry instead played e6, and I'm sure both of these players at move 51 were in some kind of time pressure. Lev pushes with b3, and things are back to level again. Rook to e8, king g7, e7, bishop to f7, and now I think rook to f8 is just dead level, but he plays rook to d8, a logical enough looking move, but rook to b4 check, king to e3, king to f6 coming around behind the pawn. Now bishop takes h7. Let's go back. If he promotes, then we simply take, and we take the bishop on f5. So bishop takes h7, king takes e7, rook to a8, rook to b6, and now I think that Lev can probably force a win home here. Maybe it's going to take a little bit of inaccuracy from Dmitry, but he plays king to d2, b2, bishop to b1, and king to f6. To be honest, who's winning? I'm not too sure. Bishop's the same color, so the chances of somebody winning are high, but who? Black has the extra pawn, so that's the only reason I'd like to have black. King to c3 was played in the game, and now I think king g5 is best, but Lev played king to g7, and Dmitry would have a dead level game if he played rook to a7. At least that's my belief. He played rook to d8 though. a5, getting the pawn one more square up, and now rook to d4 seems like a good move, keeping that pawn from coming up any further, but Dmitry plays rook to d2. And I'll have to say that his handling of this rook and pawn endgame has been wanting. It's not been very good at all. Now Lev plays rook to b3 check, and I think that black is getting the upper hand here, probably winning here. Okay, king to c2 was played by Dmitry, and now a4, here we come. Rook to d7, king to f6. Now Dmitry plays rook to d6 check here. It's worth noting that trying to get tricky with rook takes f7 doesn't work, because after king takes, he can pin the rook, but black still promotes, which pulls the bishop away, and then we can take on g3 with an easy win. So rook to d6 was played in the game, king to g5, king to d2, a3, rook to a6, rook takes g3, rook a5 check, king to f6, rook f5 check, king to e7, rook to b5, rook to g1, chasing the bishop away, he checks, king f6, bishop c2, and now a2. And one of those little fellas there is going to promote. So at this point, Dmitry resigned. So we have a win on board 2 and a draw on board 1, which should have been a win. Now, Mac missed that one. Shame on you, Mac. So we have a 1.5 to 1/2 in Arizona's favor. All right, let's get on to our next game. On board 3, we have this game fragment here. Mark Ginsberg is playing white for Arizona. He's rated 24-16. And Yan Liu is playing black for San Francisco, and he's rated 23-54. Now, Yan is a young man, and Mark is a very well-experienced veteran. And in this position, they've been hemming and hawing through the opening. It's been a Scandinavian, I believe, or center counter. And it's been one of your typical USCL games, where each side is just pressing forward a little bit, not wanting to overstep anything to get into trouble, but rather to try and keep the equilibrium going until more was determined on the other boards as to what the players needed to do in this game. So as all 4 games were going on, they're all watching each other's games and their own, trying to decide who's going to make a push here, who's going to make a push there. It can be very boring. You know, it's all positional, and it's all 4 boards are being positional for that reason. Now, it's fun to see the tactical melees that occur, and you get them once in a while. But more often than not, you're going to get this drag them down type of trench warfare. Now, we joined this game at move 21 where Mark just played d4. And now c5 was played. And I think that this is a start to all the woes for young Yan. He should probably play knight takes e4, rook takes e4, c5, and after dc5, bc5. Kind of screwed up pawn structure, but I think black's doing okay here. I think it's a level game. In the game, he had played c5, and Mark played c4. Now, I will never fault Mark for passing by an opportunity when it presents itself. Calculating things can be a different story, but he's a good calculator as well. And here he's looking to gain more scope for his pieces. Now, Yan plays knight takes e4, queen takes e4, and now Yan makes a mistake. Now, I cannot fault him for this mistake, because the proper line... Well, first let's show you what he played. He played knight to f6. Now, how can you fault him for that move? We'll come back to this in a moment. What he should play is f5. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this video, if you were raised on classical constructs of chess learning, you learn that you don't leave yourself with isolated pawns or backward pawns, things like this. So who's going to want to play this way? Well, computers are the ones that are starting to make us think in this way. The pawns are no longer the soul of chess, they are just an equal part of chess. So if this is the best way to go, it's the line that should be played. And the point here is that queen is now forced off this diagonal. And she heads back, and now knight f6. Okay, the pawn on e6 is weak. Can white get to it right away? No. Can black defend it? Yes. So white's a little bit better in this position because the pawn structure is a bit screwy for black, but it's not something that could be defeated easily. But let's go back to our game. After queen takes e4, Yan plays knight to f6. And Mark is quick to jump into the enemy camp with queen to b7. Now, Yan finds what I think is the best defense. He plays bishop d6. But let's take a little bit of exploration of this position and see what's going on here. And that is best explained by what happens after c takes d4. Well, knight to f6, and we're putting a skewer attack on the bishop on e7 with the queen on b7 and a knight. So the bishop's got to move, and now queen takes a7, gets the pawn back. Queen takes, knight takes, rook takes c4. He's up a pawn now, but knight to b5. And we can see what kind of trouble black is in after this. If bishop to b4, go rook e to c1. Rook takes, bishop takes, d3. But white can play knight to c3, blocking the possibility of that pawn coming up. Bishop takes c3, pawn takes knight to d5, a7. Knight comes back to stop the promotion, but now bishop f4 hitting the knight. Knight goes back to a8, and now bishop to b8 cuts off the defense of that knight, and the bishop on g2 is attacking the knight. This is not easy to see, but it is decisive. So we have a little flavor of what's going on here. So what about alternatives? What about queen takes b7? Well, then a b7, and now rook c to e8. We have rook takes here, bishop d6, dc5, bishop takes c5, b4, bishop to d6, now bishop c3. White is up a pawn, and it sits on the 7th rank, and in every conceivable position of the pieces, whites stand better. So instead of rook c to e8, if rook to b8, well, this is probably a bit worse, because after rook a7, he takes on d4 and knight to c6. Obviously, not good for black. Hitting the rook on b8 and the bishop on e7. So what else is there here? How about queen to d6? Well, now bishop to f4 just pretty much forces the queen to move back, because if he plays queen takes d4, queen takes e7, queen takes b2, queen takes a7, he doesn't get enough for the piece. So queen to d8, and yeah, it's just, we're going to have knight to c6, and we're going to have a whole lot of fun. Black's lost here. Bishop to d8, you know, what other choice is there? Now knight c6, cd4, and knight takes a7 is also winning, similar to lines that we were looking at before. All in all, I think Ian chose the best move with bishop to d6 here, and now knight to c6. Now he should play c takes d4. He did not. He played rook to a8, and this is a mistake, probably a losing mistake. D takes c5 is played. I think black is positionally lost here. B takes c5, and now queen takes c7. And I think that this is a slight inaccuracy by Mark, but I can see his idea behind it. It's very easy to see he's going to win the exchange, but there's actually a better move here. Now, I wish he would have taken a little more time in this position to find it. Bishop to a5. Now, the queen can trade, but we know that's just suicide for black, so queen to c8. But how do you follow this up? It's not easy to see the follow-up. And that's maybe why Mark just gave up on bishop to a5. But the follow-up is really nice. It's rook a to d1, or rook e to d1. Bishop takes rook, rook takes. Okay, that bishop's hanging on d6. And if it moves, well, where can it move to? If it moves to e7, we're just going to take it. E5, we're just going to take it. So he's got to defend it or block the attack. If he tries knight to d5, queen takes c8, rook fc8, pawn takes knight. And now e5 is probably best, because if he goes ed5, bishop takes d5, he's close to being equal in material, but I think positionally he's just dead lost here. I mean, one threat is bishop takes f7 and rook takes d6. Just too much for him to overcome. So instead of blocking, he could try knight to e8. But here we have queen takes queen, rook takes, knight takes a7, rook to b8, knight to b5, getting ready to throw that pawn up the board. And here, if bishop to e7, we have rook to d7, bishop f6, now a7. This looks clearly winning for white. And if bishop to e5, a7, knight f6, pawn takes rook, rook takes queen, and b3. And, well, white's up a full piece. So, is it worth it to invest some time here and try and find bishop to a5, queen moves back, and rook to d1? Once you saw the follow-up to this, it was pretty easy to see. Let's go back to the game. Mark played queen takes c7. And this is a forcing line, so checks, captures, and forced moves you always want to look at. But bishop a5 was a forcing line as well. Bishop takes queen, and now we check on e7. The king moves, and we can take the rook for the bishop. It was a very strong bishop, and the rook was rather passive. But on a technical sense, Mark has gained the exchange, so that should be winning, right? Right, knight to c6, got to get the knight out of dodge, and knight to d7 was played, king to g2, and bishop to g6. If he goes knight to b8, trying to get the trade of pieces there, knight to e5, And all of white's pieces stand better than any of black's pieces. And probably his best piece is the bishop on c7, and if he trades that for the knight, white still comes out ahead. So Ian played bishop to g6, and now bishop to a5, knight to b6, and I think that Mark missed another chance here. He played rook a d1, which was this whole idea of these maneuvers here, was to get a rook on the d file. But he could have done a little switchback and played bishop takes b6. And after bishop takes b6, well, if a takes b6, then simply rook e d1 is going to infiltrate with great effect. And that pass pawn on a6 is going to be a telling factor. So that's why he has to take with the bishop on b6. Now knight to e5, bishop h5, knight to d7, looking to do the same thing, bring a rook over to the d file in some manner. Or, well, let's look at if he goes bishop to c7. Well, we can take the pawn on c5, easy enough. Rook to d8 and b4, rook to d4, rook ac1, clearly winning for white. So if king to g6 here, now we can go knight takes b6, pawn takes, now a7, king f6, rook to a6, king to e7, and we can't take the pawn right away because pawn on a7 falls, but you can play rook e to a1, and the pawn on b6 cannot be defended, winning for white. Back in our game, Mark played rook a d1, bishop c2, and now again I think he should play bishop takes b6. He did not. He played rook to d2. And I think that Mark's only chink in his armor comes around this stage of the game, where he's making a transition from a favorable middle game to an end game. I think that he stumbles a little bit along the way in doing that. Now, he's a brilliant chess player, okay? I'm not going to take that away from him. And I'm mentioning this because, Mark, if you're watching this, if that's an area that you need to improve, I think it's going to take you to the next level. All right, so Ian plays bishop to a4, knight to e5, and I think that Ian is starting to find a defense, but he plays f6 here, which is not the best. I think he should go ahead and swap. Bishop takes e5, and the reason this is the idea is because you don't want to play rook takes e5 here. Do you see why? Well, yeah. Knight takes c4 is forking the rooks, equalizing on the spot. So to try and have any advantage, white has to play bishop takes b6. And now bishop to d4. That bishop's a nice bishop. He doesn't want to give it up. Rook takes d4, I think is the best shot to give back the material. cd4, and then bishop takes d4. Bishop b3, hitting the pawn. Rook to c1. Now white had to give back the exchange, but I think this gives him some chances to try and win. It's rather unclear, but I think this is the best shot in this line for white to try and win. But Ian didn't see that, and he played f6. Now bishop takes b6, and white's back on the winning path again. A takes b6. Now rook to a1, and again, I think this is not the most accurate move. Let's go back. Knight to d7, I think, is the move to play here. All right, and then if king, well, let's look at e5 first. If e5, rook to a1, bishop c6, king to f1, king to g6, a7, bishop to b7, stopping the rook from coming in, king to e2. White is still up the exchange with excellent opportunities. And back here, after knight to d7, if king to g6 right away, then we have rook takes e6, king to f7, rook d to e2, and I still like white's winning chances here because he can't take the pawn on a6. If he does, we got rook to e7. Now, if king to g8, we got knight takes on f6 check, pawn takes knight, rook takes c7, so rook to a8, now rook to e6, hitting two pawns at once. Yeah, white's up in material and is going to be even more up in material. So instead of king g8, if it goes to g6, then we got knight f8, king f5, rook takes c7. And happiness is being a full rook up, as white is here. So, Mark misses a chance with knight to d7. He plays rook to a1. Okay, we're at move 37, so we've got to cut him some slack. I'm sure both players were facing some pretty nasty time pressure. Plus, they have a different consideration than what's just on the board. They have to worry about what's going on in the other games as well. Rook takes a6 is played, and now I think white's standing better. I don't think white is winning anymore. b3, bishop c6, knight takes c6. Wow, this is kind of crazy looking, isn't it? But check this out. Rook takes a1. Alright, Mark went from being the exchange up to being a pawn down. But it's not that simple for black. His problem is his bishop on c7. Where in the hell is it going to go? Check that out, man. That's amazing. So, Mark continues to encapsulate that bishop with f4. Now, I think that Ian missed the shot here that might have saved the game. In the game, he played rook to a3. Let's step back for a moment. I think he should have tried rook to b1. The idea is similar. If white doesn't do anything aggressive, we're going to pick off that pawn on b3. But if he does try to be aggressive with rook to d7, then we go here, check. And the point is, he has to bring the king back. If he goes to h3, then bishop takes f4, gf4, rook takes b3 with check. And honestly, I don't see a way for white to press forward for a win here. He has too many weak pawns to deal with, and black's pretty compact and solid. Yes, white's got the knight and rook versus a rook, but those pawns are pretty solid. I don't see how white can force a win through here. We'll come back to that when we look at the main game. But king f1 has to be tried. Black can just keep giving checks until the cows come home. And when you reach this position here, he can take, 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 and it's 3 pawns for the piece. Rook to e7, rook to c3, knight to d8, takes on c4, takes on e6 with the knight, and now king to g6. And I really don't think black should have any particular difficulties in holding a draw here. However, in the game, the move that Ian played is a little bit different. Played rook to a3. Now the problem here is that the rook is a little bit cut off on a3 versus b1, and the white king can find his way forward. Rook to d7 is played, bishop takes on f4, pawn takes, and now rook to b3. White stands better in this, because now if black checks, the white king can go forward. Whereas before, he was able to check on b2 and b1, and whenever the king came to the third rank, he was able to play rook takes b3 with check. So knight to d8 is played, rook to b2, king to f3, and now e5. A nice move is now played by Mr. Ginsberg. He plays f5. He's actually setting up a path for his king to get in, and double attacks on g7, and maybe on f6 after that. So rook takes h2, knight to e6, and now h5. Rook h3 is another way to go, but it doesn't save the game. Now rook takes g7, king to h8, rook to g6, hitting the f6 pawn, rook to h4, rook takes f6, rook takes c4, and now king to g3 was played. Going back, rook to f7 is probably a little quicker way of getting it done. So rook to g7, rook to b7, rook to b4, f6, rook to b1, so that after f7 he can try rook to f1, king to e4, b5, king takes e5, rook e1 check. This is just an example of how the line can go. Rook checks, king to g6. He checks one more time, and we duck behind the body on h5. No more checks. So if h4, then we can go promotion. He blocks, and now if you're a Tim Burton fan, we can play rook takes g8, king takes, rook to g7 check, king back, knight to g5, h3, and mate with the knight. Or after rook interposes, we can just play rook to h7 mate for normal people. In the game, Mark played king to g3, and now b5. Black's still lost no matter what he tries. Rook to g6, rook to c1, king to h4, b4, f6, rook to f1, knight to g5, rook h1 check, king to g3, h4 check, king to g2, rook to a1, knight to f7 check, and this is going to be an example of an open field tackle checkmate, and black resigned at this point because if he plays king to h7, rook to g7 is checkmate. Very pretty. Nice game, Mark. A little bit of tweaking needs to go on in your middle game to end game work, but overall a pretty good game. So, Arizona wins game number 2 with a draw on board 1, so it's 2.5 to 1.5. Let's check in on Amanda Matier's game on board 4. Alright, in this game we have Kesav Vishwanathan playing white at the top for the San Francisco Mechanics. Kesav is rated 2134, and we have our star female player Amanda Matier playing the black pieces, and she's rated 2161. Now Amanda played a Sicilian defense, but Kesav played the wimpy version of the Sicilian. He played the, what is it? I don't know what you call it, the Alpine, the C3 Sicilian. I mean, crying out loud. You scared of her? Okay, I understand. You're scared of her. Alright, so we join this position where Kesav has just played queen to e2. And Amanda here wisely avoids going pawn grabbing. She plays bishop to c6. Why can she not grab this pawn? Well, this is an interesting little study, so let's take a look at it. Queen takes c3, rook fc1, and now queen to a3 is probably the best line. If she goes queen to b4, then you get knight to e5. Okay, this is looking a little shaky, but white can do this because the black king is stuck in the center right now. She has not yet castled. So bishop c6, rook a b1 hitting the queen yet again, queen to a4, knight c6, bc6, and now a very nice move here by white, if given the chance, d5. And this maintains the edge for white. As a matter of fact, it's probably just giving white a winning advantage. The best line here is castle. And after pawn takes, I think the white is just clearly better, maintaining the bishop pair, the initiative, and material equality. I mean, black could win the pawn, but she's going to have too many weak pawns, and we'll have to give one or two of them back. So that's the best line after d5 here. But there are some mistakes that could be made. E takes d5 is absolutely terrible because a bishop to f4, discovered check. Now, if you try and hold on to the bishop, you're going to lose your king. Bishop f5 check. King c7, and then queen to e7 is mate. Ouch. Okay, so what else after this fancy move at d5? Well, c takes d5 doesn't work because of bishop to here check, and guess what? Queen Matier doesn't get mated, but she loses her queen. So yeah, Amanda was very wise to not go pawn hunting here. Instead, she just improved the position of her pieces and played bishop c6. Now h3, bishop d5. Castling might be a bit more accurate, but bishop d5 is fine. And now I think that white might have been able to take advantage of this move order by playing bishop b5. He did not, but let's take a look at it. Check. Now, king f8 might be the best way to go here, and after knight e5, bishop e5, de5, knight c4. It looks a little bit awkward, but this may be black's best shot, and white is only ever so slightly better, I think, in this position, owing to the bishop pair mainly. So after bishop e5 check, king f8 looks pretty good, but knight c6 is playable. And after c4, bishop takes on f3, queen takes on f3, and castles. I think that white is better in this position than he was in the last one, owing to the bishop pair and better pawn structure here. Now, bad for black would be to play bishop c6. And now d5 just looks flat out dangerous for black. So bishop b5 check was the move to play here by Kesav. He didn't play it. He played rook ac1. Logical move. Knight c4, and I think with this move, Amanda just equalized the game on the spot. Knight to d2, and now rook to c8. Okay, so like I said, Amanda's equalized here, and now the players just start going through their toing and froing, being a team player to see what's happening on the other boards. And let's just move forward with this from here. Knight to e4, bishop to a3, rook to c2, queen to c6, queen to g4, and mounting a bit of pressure here. Amanda played bishop to f8, knight to d2, now h5, queen to g3, now b5, bishop takes c4, bishop takes c4, knight takes c4, queen takes c4. Alright, it's a lot of wood that came off the board, and I like black's position because of this trade, because again we're dealing with black's bishop on f8 is just defensive right now, preserving the g7 pawn, but it has a lot more freedom than the white bishop, which is on the same color complex as the central pawn. So you got to give black a little bit of an edge here, or preference, I should say. Bishop d2 was played, now h4, queen to e3, bishop to e7, f4, g6, rook f3, rook to h5, queen f2, and rook to d5. The king's rook in the Sicilian defense, in its natural habitat, d5. What a great square for a rook. Now I think that Amanda was gaining a good foothold in the position here, and I personally would love to have black's position here. The game's probably pretty equal, but just look at the two bishops, and that would tell you why I prefer the black pieces. Alright, so Kasab plays rook to b2, now a5, king to h2, a4, bishop to e1, queen to c7, king to h1, queen to c4, queen to e3. Again, this is just to gain a little time on the clock and check the status on the other boards. At least Amanda's play is confident and it's always going forward. Bishop a3, rook to e2, bishop to e7, and queen to e4. I think that rook to b2 would have maintained equality for white, at least somewhat equal, but he played queen to e4, and now b4. Nicely done by Miss Mateer. C takes b4, rook takes d4, and this is the point. Queen to e3, rook to d1. Again, another nice move. King to h2, getting out of the pin, and bishop takes b4. Picking up the b pawn, but giving up the h pawn in return. Bishop c5, hitting the queen, queen to e4, bishop to g1 check, forcing the king out, otherwise the bishop on h4 is going to be lost. And now, queen takes e4 is probably the correct move to play here, and it leads to not much more than an equal game. But Amanda probably played the best subjective move, and she played rook to d4. Queen to e5 was played, and the position's probably realistically pretty level. But Amanda makes a bad mistake here. I think she should play rook to d1, but she doesn't. She plays king to d7. Now, if you want to pause the video, I'm not going to flip the board. Stop being lazy. If you want to pause the video, find the move that white should play here. It should lead to a good advantage for white. Okay. Well, fortunately for Amanda, her opponent didn't see that this was a mistake either, and he played queen to f6. But that's not the move. The best move is rook to e1. Alright, now the poser for Amanda in this position is, what do you do with the bishop on g1? f2 is covered, e3 is covered, can't take your own rook. What do you do? Alright, you gotta play rook to d5, so that you give the bishop a way to come out. But now, after queen to f6, you still have to preserve your bishop. So bishop to b6, and queen takes f7. And black's position is just falling apart right in front of her eyes. Fortunately, though, in the game, Kassav didn't see it either, and he played queen to f6. Right concept, but the wrong timing. And now, fortunately, queen takes e2 can be played. Crikey, a free rook? Or did Amanda miscalculate something here? Queen takes f7, king to c6. The queen's protecting e6. Bishop f6, and rook to d3. Nope, it was white who miscalculated. Or as Bush would say, misunderestimated his chances. Rook takes d3, queen takes d3, king to g4, queen to e2 check, king to g3. Now, when I download these games off of ICC, I look through them real quick before I download them, see if there's anything fishy, try and get an eye on the time on the clocks. And I saw this position. I go, well, white's getting mated in a couple moves here. So, pause the video. Find the mate for black. Black to move and deliver mate in a couple moves. Go ahead and pause the video. Okay. Well, apparently Amanda was in some kind of time pressure and she didn't see it and didn't play it. The move that ends the game right away is queen to f2 check. There's only one move for white, king to g4. Queen takes g2 check. Only one move for white here, king to h4. And now do you see it? Yeah, bishop to f2. That's checkmate, folks. Poor Amanda. Missed that one. But okay, she didn't throw the win away. Okay, she's up gobs of material. I think it's a rook for a pawn. She plays queen to d3 check. So that after king to g4, she can go to f5 check, king to g3. And now here's another place to pause the video and find a killer move for black. Okay, hopefully you paused the video, and hopefully you found rook to d8. Again, Amanda didn't see this, and it's hard to see things like this when you're in time pressure. The rook threatens mate in 2. Rook to d3, king to h4, queen to h5 would be mate. Only one way to really get around that, and that's to take, but that drops the queen on f7. Bravo! But Amanda didn't see that. And like I said, I did not watch these games as they were being played, but I can only imagine Amanda just panicking, trying to get her moves in. Even though she gets 30 seconds per move, she's not the type of person that likes to be short on time. So if that was the case, I can understand it rattling her a bit. She plays bishop to e3, with obvious threat. Queen takes f4 as mate. So king to h2, queen takes f4, and now there's mate in 6. If g3 here, it's even quicker. That would be mate. But king to h1, queen f1, king to h2, and now she misses the best chance again. Here, she should play queen to g1. King comes up, queen to f2. Remember this? Yeah, it's the same. Now, if king to h2, then we do it a little differently here. And that's mate. But after king to g4, we have the exact same pattern, and bishop f2 is mate. Alright, bishop f4 check, g3, queen to f2 check, king to h1, queen to f3 check, and she picks up a pawn with check. Bishop e3, by the way, leads to a mate. Okay. Queen takes g3, just grabbing pawns and running. She's a materialistic girl, I think. Queen takes pawn with check, another pawn. Now queen to e3, and now rook to b8, getting ready to bring the rook into the game. And after queen takes g6, Amanda checks on f3, so that after king to e1, she can play queen to g3. White resigned at this point because the trade of queens is futile, and he's lost anyhow after these moves. So, yeah. Nice game by Amanda. I'm poking fun at you for missing the quick mates, but you already had the game won at that point, so don't sweat it. Did a nice job. So, folks, think about this. This is the third win for Arizona. Boards 2, 3, and 4 won their games. And on board 1, Mac missed the win just a move before they agreed to a draw. So it was almost a total rout after having a very rough week the week before against Manhattan. Yeah, in that game, in that match against Manhattan, I really don't know what happened. Dipro had 1 minute and 27 seconds to go in that game on board 4 to play a very simple move, knight to c5, and you get 30 seconds for each move after that. Very simple way to win that game. And he overstepped the time limit. I don't understand that at all. But, they lost that match because of that game. But here, they bounced back. Alright, that's it for this video. Let's see what happens next week. Is that another interdivisional matchup? Arizona takes on the Baltimore Kingfishers. Huh. That's going to be on Wednesday, October 10th, starting at 9 p.m. Eastern. So if you have the internet, Why wouldn't you? You're watching these videos on the internet. So if you have the ability, tune into chess.com or onto ICC and check out the games. It's a lot of fun, folks. I'm sorry I didn't bring anything last week for you, but I hope you understand what was going on in my personal life. A very fantastic match against San Francisco. 3.5 to 1/2. It was almost 4-0. Dynamite. I hope that builds their confidence that they can bounce back against anybody. And the loss against Manhattan was just by seconds. It was not due to ability. I think it was more due to an error on the clock somewhere. Not one of the players fudging around. But that's me. Alright, folks. Thanks for watching. And until next time, good luck.